Hey everyone, welcome back to Shutter Magazine. I'm Dustin Lucas, and today I'm going to be talking to you about how to pivot your post-production with presets and profiles. So those are two pretty useful terms for Lightroom users, right? So as a Lightroom user, I always want to be working in the newest software. I know I've made mistakes in the past when I upgraded from Lightroom 5 to Lightroom CC and everything was running slow on my machine. That happens, right? You jump too fast to software. Well, now with the latest version of Lightroom 7.3.1, Classic is the best option for me, right? So there's a new layout, there's more editability, and there's also a whole new restructured develop panel. So within that, I'm going to have a much more intuitive process for color profiles. There's going to be new presets for me given by Lightroom, a lot of new features. Something that you're going to notice as soon as we open up our catalog, you're going to notice right away the conversion of all of our presets to XMPs. So what does this mean? Well, it means that all of your LR template files or all of your presets you've either purchased, imported, or created in Lightroom are now going to be converted to XMP files. So it's going to create two versions. You're going to keep your LR template files in their original folder, and these new XMPs are going to save as well. This is just telling me which profiles couldn't be renamed, which isn't a big deal. I go ahead and click OK. And it's going to confirm that all of the profiles have been updated. Excuse me, all of the presets have been converted. So now that I'm looking at different features of Lightroom Classic, is you're going to notice as we jump into the develop panel, we have a whole new profile option here, right? So our profiles, our camera profiles are at the very top for us, as well as we have a larger tone curve. So something many of you that have been wanting a larger tone curve or use this option, it's much easier to make these custom point curves right away. Another option that they added to the basic panel is the Dehaze. So we can start to use this as more of a creative tool for adjusting some of our midtones, shadows, and black point. So it becomes a very useful feature in this new version. So we'll jump into all these different features one by one. First, we'll start out with the develop module, the new layout, and the settings, and we'll go from there. So something you're going to notice right away in the develop module is the new layout, right? So I'm not talking about new panels on the right, new features, new settings, just things moving around, right? So you'll notice right under treatment at the very top of the basic panel, we have profile. So it says Adobe standard, that's the standard version of camera profile that's going to apply. You have another version, Adobe color, which is the new face of for Lightroom specifically. So you'll notice when you import images into Lightroom, Adobe color is going to automatically apply. We'll circle back to that a little later on, but I just wanted to sort of show you this new profile feature and where it's moved, right? It used to be in calibration. All of your RGB primaries and your shadow adjustments for your for your images are still available for you, as well as the process version, but the camera profile is now in the basic panel. Another option or another feature in the basic panel is Dehaze. So they removed it from the effects panel that was hidden way down there with the post-crop vignette and the grain options, as you can now use Dehaze in your presence panel, and rightfully so, it should be in this panel, so that way you can quickly adjust some of these more creative elements for the presence of your image, like clarity, color, and those kind of the sharpness and color kind of work a little well, a little more closely in the presence panel. Another big upgrade, and I mean that literally, is the tone curve, right? So the tone curve module got larger, so it allows many of us that use the tone curve, and specifically the point curve when they're doing custom ones, to be a little more precise in these adjustments. So I'm on a laptop right now, and it's pretty decent size for me here, but it allows me to create my points, move them around, but be a little more precise with my adjustments. So if I want to create like a little more a little more of a matte look, or if I want to kind of kill some of the highlights a little bit more, I can do that within this module, because now I have a little more flexibility in, we don't want to do that. I have a little more flexibility in tweaking my tone curve. So moving on, we have a few different options here in the tone curve, as we normally, as you'll see, I have a bunch of different kind of pre-built film styles, custom curves. So a lot of times those are included with some of your third-party softwares. They'll automatically install in the tone curve as well. So it offers those. So where you want to start to adjust those is in the RGB channels, right? So we'll see that the tone curve shifts a little bit to give us some of that look that it's given here. Not necessarily my favorite style overall. So I'm going to go back a couple steps here and undo some of those. So for us, it's a it's just an added feature. It makes it a little more flexible to use the tone curve. You still have your region as well as your point curve here, so all those things are the same. At the very top of our list, you'll notice we still have our medium contrast and our strong contrast, a very subtle S curve, very popular in the tone curve panel. So great features for the develop module, and just some more things to come. I mean, obviously they're listening to photographers and increasing that sort of maximizing your efficiency and things like that with the develop panel, very helpful. Moving on to presets, talking about efficiency, we can look at some of these new presets that Lightroom offers to us in Classic 731. So as a Lightroom user, presets are nothing new to me. I use presets maybe when I import, when I'm editing in the develop panel, and maybe when I'm exporting images, right? So import presets are going to be useful for corrective things, but you definitely want to be mindful of like lens correction, sharpening, noise reduction, types of things that take a while to process to your images that Lightroom has to think about and render. I recommend staying away from import presets altogether. You want to see the sort of as shot, untouched edit versus what you're editing. But again, it's personal preference, just something that I, for my own workflow, I stay away from. Moving off of that topic, Lightroom presets, right? So we're in the develop panel and we're looking at the new options that Lightroom has given us, right? So you're going to notice there's multiple preset sets. Like color, creative, black and white, and curve. These three are kind of more of a total package. What I mean by that is you'll notice that it adjusts settings from my, say, color correction. And I want to remind you, you always want to apply a preset, then edit. Because when you do it after the fact, it's going to tweak all of those settings that you spent time adjusting, which is kind of pointless, right? So if I'm making all these adjustments here to the way I want the image to look, if I apply a preset over top of it, now I'm re-editing from scratch. As you notice, all of these values kind of go to a whole value. So definitely use these as a starting point and then adjust each image as you go. So moving into color, creative, black and white, the color has some pretty cool options. I like matte. Natural is nothing, there's nothing kind of crazy about that. You'll notice too that we have the hovering feature here, which is so crucial to efficiency, but also letting me see right away, am I going to like this effect or not? Because these are effects to me, right? I want to make sure they they look good, and I want to move on and apply them to my images. So this is going to be more of like an image-to-image adjustment, and then maybe I can sync those, or if I'm in the library module, I'm selecting all my images, and I want to just choose the saved presets and apply them to all of my images, right? So that's how I can do it to all of them. If I have them all selected here in the library module, choose the saved preset, choose color, and now I have matte, right? So and looking at it individually in the develop panel, we can just kind of see what each of those effects look like. So I haven't really found anything in the creative panel that I like per se. I kind of stay away from those altogether. I'm just going to turn those off. Black and white has some nice options here, some different punchier options for the guys. Same way here, high contrast and detail, pretty nice preset overall. If I want to see what this preset looks like on my images, from the start, before I get started, I can choose the before and after preview. I can throw my edit to the before, and then I can start to compare the differences between what the matte looks like and my regular edit. So just kind of a little bit of a variance between those two adds a little more of kind of a creative flair. But creativity, that's everyone has their opinion and their tastes. So two different types of presets that are kind of made for us in Lightroom. And the way to think about presets, you have a total package, which is going to adjust multiple panels and settings, or you have ones that are just going to adjust specific panels, right? So there's one to just do a curve, there's one for grain, there's one for sharpening. As you notice that the sharpening is going to allow me to it's only going to adjust those settings, also with a heavy vignette. So if I wanted to start with a matte, and if I say, we reset the image and we want to start with matte, my sharpening stays at 40, nothing changes there. So if we go and we click on matte and it applies that, then we can go in. I'm not going to adjust the tone curve, it kind of ruins what the matte's supposed to look like, right? So if I go down, I want to add a little grain. Let's go into single image mode. Then I want to add some heavy sharpening. You'll notice that it's just adding the sharpening, same with the vignette. So we can kind of get stackable options here, and you can create multiple presets. For lens correction, we can do the exact same thing if we wanted to correct lens, but then also bring our vignetting back. We have all of those options as well to do some of those corrective things, which I think work really well as a stackable, something to correct issues with our image. And then more of the creative stuff is going to be useful as like a total package here. So when you create a preset, it's a good point. If we want to create a preset, because none of those have the enable custom camera profile, a lens correction, as well as maybe just a little bit of noise reduction, just to soften the images slightly. And maybe we don't want to desaturate the image so much, maybe just by 10. So what we can do is we can do Shift Command or Shift Control N, and we can choose all of the different settings that we want to incorporate in our new preset. Now this is very important when you want to do package-based presets. You want to be mindful of all the settings that are being adjusted to make sure to only adjust those ones, check mark those boxes. If you're creating a more stackable style preset here, so if we want to do check none, then we can do one for just sharpening, or we can do one for just lens correction. And if you don't want lens vignetting to be negative 100, we can turn that off as well. And we have some different options. So you can create more of a stackable option, or something that's more of a all-encompassing. You know, we want to remove exposure and white balance. Probably want to remove the graduated filters. Don't necessarily want to incorporate those. Those are more image to image rather than something you could apply to all of them. But this allows you to sort of change up. I'll probably take transform off as well to create a more package-based preset. Better way to think about it. So there's definitely a lot of options there with the presets. You know, we talked already a little bit about the XMPs that that save. These are saved within Lightroom. But if you have a personal preset here, that I've created, these ones don't really work on this image necessarily, so I'm gonna undo those. They don't look good. That happens with presets, right? Sometimes they don't make sense, but that's okay. That's why we can take our image back to our matte look here, and if I want to look to see where those are saved, I can do Show in Finder or Show in Explorer, and it's going to show me right away where all of these are saved in my hidden folders here. So a lot of options with presets. Let's move into color profiles. It's a more exciting feature in the new Lightroom Classic 731 and see what those offer. So now we're ready to move on to color profiles. So you'll notice at the very top of the basic panel, our profile where Adobe Standard lives is no longer in the calibration or camera calibration panel, right? So you still have the RGB primaries, you still have your shadow adjustment and the process version. All that stuff is way down in calibration, but your profile can really enhance your image, but also push the creativity, right? So I'm very excited about this feature because it's in the basic panel. It should be one of the first things I think about. What should my image look like from the start? So I already have a color corrected file here, and that's okay, right? We can start to look at this more of a creative rather than corrective. If it's corrective, you want to apply it up front and then adjust accordingly. So I'm going to kind of look at this from a more creative perspective. And as soon as I click on Adobe Standard, you're noticing all these kind of odd options. You might remember Adobe Neutral, Camera Standard sounds familiar, but these other ones might be foreign to you altogether. So if we click either on Browse or we click on our new little kind of grid cube here, we go into our profile browser. So what this allows us to do is it allows us to see the different profile sets. So this is quite different. So when you're looking in here, you no longer have just this long list of every profile installed on your machine. You have these different profile sets. And what I love about these three different tiers is you have a favorites option. So when you star any one of your profiles below, they automatically appear, or if you unstar it, will disappear from the favorites panel. So I can immediately recall these. And if you notice, when we close this, those are the options that we have available here are going to be in our favorites. It's going to be ones that we want to recall and use most often. Who cares about the other 200 profiles we never use? Those can just go away, right? So you have the ability to organize your profiles a little bit better rather than just looking at a laundry list that's in alphabetical order. It just doesn't make sense for organization. Awesome new feature in the profile browser. So right away you'll notice a couple differences. You'll notice that there's the Adobe section. Okay, all of the Adobe options seem pretty straightforward except this new one, Adobe Color. And when you click on it, you'll notice it's a little bit different from Adobe Standard. So now we have Adobe Standard applied, and when we apply Adobe Color, we get a little more contrast. So you'll notice that you get a little more, there's a little more dynamic range. There's also a little heavier in the blacks, a little brighter in the whites, but it's just a little feature to get rid of this kind of the old sort of world, or the standard for Lightroom has always been Adobe Standard, and a lot of people abandon it and use different ones. We'll get to those in a bit, but Adobe Color is a pretty awesome standard. So when you bring images into Lightroom, when you import images into Lightroom Classic, you'll notice that Adobe Color is automatically applied. So Lightroom's making the shift to get you to use Adobe Color. It's a better profile overall. So huge upgrade, at least from Adobe Standard. I don't think I'll be using that any longer. And you'll notice that right away it automatically sort of just works its way into your workflow because Adobe Color is applied automatically. We already talked about some of the favorites, right? And so I have Adobe Neutral in there for some of the more flat work, as well as Adobe Standard. I can go ahead and unstar that. We're not going to use Adobe Standard anymore. And we have some of our other options. I think the Adobe Vivid and Portrait, all those are kind of a little too extreme. Now, camera matching is one that many of you probably use the camera standard, which I've starred as well. It kind of gives you a little bold punch. It's the one that Adobe tries to match what it looked like in camera. So if you're looking at the Canon or Nikon or Sony, any of those camera standards options, this is going to try and mimic that look overall. So that's definitely useful for anybody who likes to have a little more punch to their images. I think it goes a little too far. I like the Adobe Color. It's a little more subtle. I can let my tonal sliders decide for me. So third-party profiles, right? All of those are going to show up here in this long profiles, right? That's the name of the set. Pretty straightforward. So all your third-party stuff, your Visco, your Develop, all your different kind of ones that you've purchased over the years, those are all going to kind of exist here. You'll notice as well, like the presets, when you hover over each one of these, you have options to view. You can also change the list and go to grid if you want to see a little view of each of them. I think that's kind of a waste of time since you have the ability to preview those, so I like to keep it in a list. Just makes it a little more organized for me. So you can go down here, you'll notice that there's legacy, so it's going to create a black and white version for every one of these as well. So we have all these different options to go through. And what's pretty cool about profiles are if I apply, if I like Tri-X film, I want to apply the Tri-X, it's a little too extreme. You have your different Tri-X C black and white. If I apply that, it actually changes the image to a black and white here. So I can filter really quickly to the black and white. So pretty cool feature that the camera profiles will change your images to an actual black and white treatment, so you can filter to those images. I thought that was a pretty interesting feature as well. You can also scroll down and you'll notice that there's a whole new panel for creative options. We have artistic. I don't find that any of these are very useful, or much like the creative presets by Lightroom. They kind of lose their effect by being a little over the top. Black and white's okay, but one that I really like is the modern. And what I like about these is when I apply my modern effect and I like the way this looks, I can increase or decrease the amount. So I don't really have the ability to adjust the tone settings or the brightness or any of that kind of stuff, but I do have the ability to choose the amount. So if I want to throw that all the way up to really kind of make the image look disgusting, I can, or I can decrease it. But what's really nice is if I find an effect that I think is a little too rich for my image, like for instance, maybe I want to apply the Modern 7, I can take it back a little bit just so I can dial back those settings. It gives me the ability to do that. So what I can do is also star that, takes it right into my favorites. So I have the ability to recall any of these presets up front, any of these ones that I use all the time, some of my black and white, the modern ones, just gives you a little more flexibility. You'll notice that if I click on any one of these other profiles, I don't have the slider option. It's only going to be on these creative ones, so you have a little flexibility there. But once we apply that, that effect, we can always dial it back based on our image, or now we can start doing some of our adjustments here to bring back, you know, if it's a little too strong on the camera profile. So pretty awesome features to reorganize our current profiles into different sets. You have the ability to make favorites, but then also the creative ones give us a little more option, like these modern. So we can build all of these into a preset. Of course, treatment and profile is going to be that setting that you want to make sure is adjusted. It loops treatment and profiling together, because like we talked about, if I turn an image black and white, it's going to change the treatment, so I can filter to that. That's very important for organization and sorting images. But it's pretty simple and pretty quick and intuitive to do the color profiles and now build those into presets. So yeah, everything looks good so far. So now that we've gone through all of the updates of Lightroom Classic, I highly recommend you upgrade to 7.3.1. Not just because of the bugs and the issues though, with some of the presets applying and things like that, but definitely because of the profile browser, the added presets. There's definitely a lot of features, the larger tone curve, as well as the dehaze options. You know, there's a lot of you know, cool features, but definitely useful ones for my workflow. And that's what it's about, right? Is it useful for me, or is it just one of those petty upgrades to say that they upgraded the software? So with that, you know, as you buy new equipment, you buy you know, new cameras, of course. You want those new cameras, those new RAW files to be processed to their maximum potential, but also be able to even just import into Lightroom. So some of you buying newer cameras are going to have to be forced into Lightroom Classic, or maybe you're abandoning Lightroom altogether, and that's okay. You know, trying other different options. But I highly recommend, if you're working in Lightroom and you haven't gone away from Lightroom CC 2015 or Lightroom 5, Lightroom Classic 7.3.1 is definitely going to be quite a bit of an upgrade for you. You know, some things like Adobe Color versus Adobe Standard, I think that's massive for Adobe Lightroom, just because of the change and what that different profile and just some different options for you for a little more color contrast. They're trying to improve what they consider a standard image should look like. So if you're ready to pivot your post-production, I highly recommend you do it today and just get used to the features and the efficiency of being more creative in Lightroom with the Classic and the new 7.3.1 features. Thanks for listening.